Blood is thicker than water, but greed? Greed dissolves both. My parents tried to sell my childhood home to fund my brother's lavish mistakes, laughing at the idea I could ever afford it. So, I bought it in secret. What happened at the closing table destroyed our family forever. To understand the absolute betrayal that fractured my family, you first have to understand the dynamic that ruled our household for 3 decades. In the eyes of my parents, Richard and Martha, the sun rose and set on my older brother, David. David was the golden child. He was charismatic, loud, and possessed an unearned confidence that my parents mistook for ambition. I, on the other hand, was Clara, the quiet, dependable, and entirely invisible daughter. I was the one who got straight A's without needing a parade, who paid my own way through college, and who silently built a highly lucrative career in boutique financial consulting. My parents didn't understand what I did. To them, I was just doing some math on a computer, while David was always on the verge of becoming the next tech billionaire. The reality was entirely different. By the time I was 32, my consulting firm was pulling in 7 figures annually. I drove a modest Honda, lived in a comfortable but unassuming apartment, and invested everything. I never flaunted my wealth because I knew exactly what would happen. My parents would expect me to fund David's chaotic life. David's track record was a masterclass in financial ruin. At 24, it was a craft brewery that folded in 6 months. At 28, it was a revolutionary fitness app that bled my parents for $100,000 before vanishing from the App Store. Every time, Richard and Martha bailed him out, dipping into their savings, remortgaging their peace of mind, and making excuses for his failures. "He just needs the right break, Clara," my mother would sigh, stirring her tea. "You wouldn't understand the pressure he's under." The breaking point arrived on a chilly Sunday evening in October. We were sitting in the formal dining room of our childhood home in Oak Park, Illinois. It was a stunning, sprawling Victorian home with a wraparound porch, original hardwood floors, and a massive oak tree in the front yard. I loved this house. It was my sanctuary. 2 years prior, when the roof was caving in, and my parents were panicking about a second mortgage, I quietly stepped in. I told them my company gave me a generous bonus and paid the $28,000 repair bill directly to the contractors. I also paid to have the entire wraparound porch restored. I didn't ask for a dime in return. I just wanted to preserve the home I love. As Martha served the roast, Richard cleared his throat. It was his signature move when he was about to deliver a rehearsed speech. "Kids, your mother and I have made a big decision," Richard announced, looking primarily at David. "We are putting the house on the market." My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. "What? Why? You love this house. Mom, your garden." Martha wouldn't look at me. She stared intently at her napkin. "It's just too much space for us now, Clara. And, well, David has an incredible opportunity, a real game changer." I turned my gaze to my brother. David was grinning, a smug, self-satisfied smirk plastered across his face. "It's a crypto-integrated logistics platform," he said, using buzzwords that I knew for a fact he didn't comprehend. "I've got the developers lined up. I just need the seed capital. Mom and Dad have generously agreed to step in as my angel investors." My stomach dropped. They were selling our family home, the home I had dumped nearly $50,000 of my own money into repairing to fund a glorified crypto scam. "How much do you need, David?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "300,000, he replied breezily. "It's a sure thing, Clara. I'll pay them back double in 18 months. "You haven't paid them back for the gym or the brewery or the food truck," I stated flatly. "Clara, that is enough," my father barked, slamming his hand on the mahogany table. "Your brother is an entrepreneur. You sit in a cubicle all day. You don't understand the risks of real business. We are selling, and that is final." I took a deep breath, fighting the tears of frustration stinging my eyes. I looked around the room, at the custom crown molding I had painstakingly stripped and restained during my high school summers. "Don't list it," I said quietly. "I'll buy it." Silence descended on the dining room. Then, David snorted. A second later, my father burst into genuine, belly-aching laughter. "Oh, sweetie," my mother said, offering me a patronizing smile. "That's a lovely thought. But our realtor, Susan, says we can list this place for $850,000, especially with the new roof and porch. You can't afford a mortgage like that on your little salary." They were using my renovations to artificially inflate the price of the home to give the profits to my brother while laughing at my financial status. "I can get approved," I insisted, though I was entirely capable of buying it in cash. "Let me buy it. Keep it in the family." "No," Richard said firmly, wiping a tear of mirth from his eye. "We need a quick close, all cash or pre-approved conventional, with a heavy down payment. We don't have time to wait for you to scrape together pennies, Clara. David needs the capital by the end of November to secure his developers." I looked at my brother, who gave me a condescending wink. "Maybe next time, sis, when you're in the big leagues." I didn't say another word for the rest of the dinner. I ate my roast, drank my wine, and mentally severed the last fraying emotional tie I had to my parents. They didn't see me as a daughter. They saw me as an audience member to David's life. When I drove back to my apartment that night, I didn't cry. I was entirely consumed by a cold, sharp, and brilliantly vindictive clarity. They wanted a wealthy buyer with a quick, all-cash close? I would give them exactly what they asked for. The very next morning, I walked into the plush, high-rise office of my corporate attorney, Thomas Sterling. Thomas knew exactly how much I was worth, and he knew the ruthless efficiency with which I operated my business. When I laid out my plan to him, he took off his glasses, polished them slowly, and smiled. "It's entirely legal, Clara," Thomas said, leaning back in his leather chair, "but it is going to be incredibly messy when they find out." "I don't care," I replied. "Set up an LLC. Keep my name entirely off the public-facing documents. I want ironclad anonymity until the ink is dry." By Tuesday, Oak Street Holdings LLC was officially incorporated in Delaware, completely shielding my identity. But an LLC can't tour a house or negotiate a contract. For that, I needed a proxy. I needed someone intimidating, sophisticated, and entirely cutthroat. Enter Chloe Kensington. Chloe was a high-end luxury real estate broker I had met at a networking gala a year prior. She exclusively dealt with multi-million-dollar commercial properties and high-net-worth individuals. She wore tailored Prada suits, carried a Birkin bag like a weapon, and negotiated like a starving shark. I hired her not just as my agent, but as the face of my phantom buyer. "So, let me get this straight," Chloe said over coffee, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against her iPad. "You want me to represent this LLC, make an all-cash offer on your parents' house, and absolutely squeeze them on the terms?" "Exactly," I said. "They are greedy, and my brother is desperate for the cash. They listed it yesterday for $850,000. I know for a fact the HVAC system is 20 years old, the foundation in the northeast corner has minor settling issues, and the basement floods if it rains for more than 3 days straight." Chloe grinned, a terrifyingly beautiful expression. "Oh, Clara, I am going to have so much fun with this." On Thursday, Chloe scheduled a private viewing. I wasn't there, but she gave me a blow-by-blow account later. My parents, accustomed to dealing with their folksy neighborhood realtor, Susan, were entirely unprepared for Chloe. She arrived in a black town car, stepped out in 4-inch Louboutins, and toured the house with an icy, unimpressed demeanor. "Your parents were practically tripping over themselves," Chloe told me over the phone, laughing. "Your mother kept offering me homemade cookies. Your father tried to act like a big-shot businessman, boasting about the recent upgrades to the roof. I just looked at him and said, 'Yes, asphalt shingles. Adequate, but hardly premium.'" "Did you make the offer?" I asked, my heart racing. "I did, but I played them perfectly. I told them my client is an overseas investor looking for a quick addition to their Midwest portfolio. I offered $800,000. All cash. 14-day closing." I gasped. 50,000 under asking? "Watch," Chloe promised. "They'll bite. The greed will make them do something stupid." She was right. The next day, my father called me. I let it go to voicemail, but later listened to his giddy message. Clara, you wouldn't believe it. Some fancy corporate buyer from out of town just dropped an all-cash offer on the house. We countered at $875,000. Susan said we should try to start a bidding war. David is already picking out office space for his startup. I immediately texted Chloe. They countered at $875K. Chloe's response was instantaneous. Watch me work. Chloe officially withdrew the offer. She told Susan, my parents' realtor, that her client was insulted by the amateurish attempt to start a phantom bidding war and was moving on to another property in a neighboring suburb. Panic set in. My parents had already mentally spent that money. Worse, David had apparently signed a preliminary lease for an expensive office space downtown, relying on the immediate cash infusion. By Saturday morning, my phone was blowing up with texts from my mother. Clara, please pray for us. The buyer walked away. David is furious. He's yelling at your father. We don't know what to do. I sat on my couch, sipping my coffee, feeling a dark sense of satisfaction wash over me. The golden child was throwing a tantrum because his piggy bank was suddenly locked. On Sunday, my parents forced their realtor to practically beg Chloe to come back to the table. Chloe, acting as the reluctant intermediary for her annoyed billionaire client, agreed to reconsider, but only on punishing terms. My client has lost faith in the sellers, Chloe informed Susan coldly over an email I was blind copied on. We will reinstate an all-cash offer, but the price is now $780,000. Furthermore, we are demanding a full, invasive inspection. If a single defect is found, my client will demand closing credits. Take it, or we never speak again. They accepted within 10 minutes. The inspection was a bloodbath. Because I had lived in that house for 18 years, I knew where every single skeleton was buried. I gave Chloe a literal map of defects. The inspector found the failing HVAC. He found the foundation settling. He found the ancient, non-compliant electrical wiring in the guest bedroom. With every discovery, Chloe tightened the screws. She demanded a $30,000 credit at closing to cover the necessary modernizations. My father was apoplectic. He called me, venting his frustration. This buyer is a monster, Clara. They are bleeding us dry. 30 grand for wiring and a little foundation crack? It's extortion. Why don't you just walk away, Dad? I asked innocently, fighting to keep my voice steady. Wait for another buyer. We can't, he shouted into the phone. David's developers are threatening to walk if he doesn't wire them a $50,000 deposit by Friday. We are trapped. We have to take the deal. I hung up the phone and looked out my window at the city skyline. They were trapped by their own favoritism. They were willingly taking a massive financial hit, selling a house they loved to a stranger they hated, all to appease a son who would burn through the money in less than a year. The final contract was signed. The closing date was set for exactly 2 weeks later. My parents thought they were signing their legacy away to a faceless corporation. They had no idea they were simply giving me the keys to my own kingdom, and at a massive discount, no less. The stage was set. The paperwork was in motion, and I was already picking out the perfect outfit to wear to the closing table, where the masks were finally going to come off. The 2 weeks leading up to the closing date were a masterclass in watching a self-inflicted disaster unfold. I maintained my usual routine, going to the office, reviewing financial models, and ignoring my parents' frantic phone calls during business hours. When I finally deigned to return their calls in the evenings, I played the role of the sympathetic, slightly detached daughter to perfection. My mother, Martha, was a wreck. The reality of moving out of her massive Victorian home in 14 days had finally shattered her delusion that this was a purely positive business transaction. She called me on a Tuesday, sobbing over packing tape. Clara, they won't even let us keep the dining room chandelier. She wept into the receiver. That monster of a buyer, Chloe, sent a formal notice through her lawyer that all affixed lighting must remain. It's an antique. Your father bought it in Paris. Well, Mom, I said smoothly, sipping a glass of Merlot in my apartment, You did agree to a standard fixture clause to rush the closing. You couldn't afford to lose this buyer, remember? David needs his money. At the mention of David, her crying abruptly stopped, replaced by a defensive, brittle tone. Yes, well, David is under an immense amount of pressure. He had to take out a short-term, high-interest bridge loan from some private investors just to keep his developers from walking away before closing. He's risking everything for our future. Our future. Not mine. Theirs. And David's. I decided to pay them a visit that Saturday under the guise of helping them pack. In truth, I wanted to survey my new property and watch the panic up close. When I pulled up to the Oak Park house, a budget moving truck was parked precariously on the lawn, a far cry from the premium, white-glove moving services my parents used to employ. Inside, the house was a disaster zone of cardboard boxes and shredded newspaper. My father, Richard, was standing in the kitchen, a glass of amber liquid in his hand at 2 in the afternoon. His face was flushed, and the confident, booming patriarch who had laughed at me over roast beef just weeks prior was gone. In his place was a stressed, aging man realizing the math wasn't adding up. "It's a bloodbath, Clara," he muttered, gesturing vaguely with his scotch. After paying off the remaining mortgage, Susan's realtor fees, the transfer taxes, and that absurd $30,000 credit for the foundation, our net proceeds are hundreds of thousands less than we projected. "I'm sorry, Dad," I lied effortlessly. "Are you and Mom still moving into that luxury condo downtown?" He grimaced. No. David needs the lion's share of the liquid cash to cover his bridge loan and secure his commercial lease. Your mother and we're renting a 2-bedroom apartment in Schaumburg for a year until David's crypto platform goes public. Schaumburg. A perfectly fine suburb, but a massive downgrade from the historic, wealthy enclave of Oak Park. They were sacrificing their retirement comfort for a scam. Suddenly, the front door banged open. David stormed in, practically vibrating with manic, stressed energy. He didn't even acknowledge me. "Dad, did Susan wire the closing instructions to the title company yet?" he barked, aggressively tapping his phone screen. "My guys are breathing down my neck. If that wire transfer doesn't hit my account by 3:00 p.m. on Friday, the bridge lenders are going to take my car." "Susan is handling it, David. Calm down," my father snapped back, the tension finally causing a crack in their perfect father-son dynamic. "We are selling our home for you. The least you could do is show some gratitude." David scoffed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "I'll show gratitude when I make you multimillionaires next year. Just make sure the corporate buyer doesn't pull any last-minute stunts." I stood quietly by the kitchen island, running my hand over the cool granite countertop. "Oh, David," I thought, a cold smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. "The stunts haven't even started." Friday, November 14th. The day of the closing. The meeting was scheduled for 1:00 p.m. at Fidelity National Title, in a sleek, glass-paneled high-rise in downtown Chicago. I had taken the entire day off work. I visited my favorite salon for a blowout, put on a perfectly tailored, charcoal gray Hugo Boss suit, and wore the vintage Cartier watch I had bought myself for my 30th birthday. I looked like exactly what I was, a woman who held all the cards. I arrived at the title company at 12:45 p.m. My lawyer, Thomas Sterling, and my broker, Chloe Kensington, were already waiting in the marble lobby. Chloe handed me a latte, her eyes sparkling with malicious glee. "They're already in conference room B," Chloe whispered. "Your brother is pacing holes into the carpet. He actually asked the receptionist if they could expedite the wire transfer." "Let's go put them out of their misery," Thomas said dryly, adjusting his briefcase. We walked down the long, carpeted hallway. Through the glass walls of conference room B, I could see the scene unfolding. My father was reviewing a stack of paperwork, looking exhausted. My mother was clutching a tissue, dabbing her eyes. David was standing by the window, violently chewing a piece of gum. Susan, their neighborhood realtor, sat nervously at the edge of the table. At the head of the mahogany table sat the escrow officer, a balding man named Greg. Chloe opened the door first. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. My parents immediately stiffened, recognizing the ruthless broker who had bled them dry on the purchase price. Ah, the buyer's representation has arrived, Greg, the escrow officer, said brightly, standing up. Come in, come in. Thomas walked in next, placing his heavy leather briefcase on the table, and then I stepped into the room. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of heavy, suffocating silence that occurs right before a bomb detonates. My mother blinked, her brain struggling to process the visual information. Clara, sweetheart, what are you doing here? Did you bring us lunch? David stopped chewing his gum. His eyes darted from me, to Chloe, to Thomas, and back to me. Clara, get out. This is a private commercial real estate transaction. We don't have time for a family reunion. I didn't look at my brother. I walked calmly to the empty leather chair directly across from my father and sat down. I placed my designer handbag on the table and folded my hands. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, David, I said, my voice echoing slightly in the sterile room. Greg looked confused. He glanced at his file. I'm sorry. I have the buyer listed as Oak Street Holdings, LLC. Are you? Yes, Greg. Thomas intervened smoothly, opening his briefcase and extracting a thick, blue-backed legal folder. He slid it across the table to the escrow officer. These are the operating agreements and the articles of incorporation for Oak Street Holdings, LLC. As you can see on page 4, the sole managing member, holding 100% equity, is Clara. My father physically recoiled, hitting the back of his chair. What? Susan, their realtor, let out a sharp gasp. Clara, you are the corporate buyer? But the overseas investor? My mother stammered, looking wildly at Chloe. You said you represented a billionaire. Chloe offered a razor-thin smile. I represent high-net-worth individuals, Martha. Clara is one of them. She instructed me to acquire this property anonymously. I simply executed her wishes. David's face went from pale to a mottled, furious red. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He lunged forward, placing both hands flat on the table. You artificially tanked the purchase price. You demanded 30 grand in fake repair credits. You bled our parents dry. I didn't fake a single thing, David, I replied, staring him dead in the eyes. The HVAC was failing. The foundation was cracked. I just refused to pay a premium for your delusions. Mom and Dad wanted an all-cash buyer who could close in 14 days. I provided. This is fraud, my father roared, his voice shaking the glass walls. He pointed a trembling finger at Thomas. This is illegal. We are canceling the sale. Susan, rip up those contracts. Susan looked paralyzed, her eyes wide with terror. Thomas Sterling didn't even blink. He leaned forward, his voice calm, authoritative, and laced with legal menace. Richard, I strongly advise you to lower your voice. There is absolutely nothing illegal about a buyer utilizing an LLC for privacy. You signed a legally binding purchase agreement. You accepted the earnest money. You signed the final settlement statement 10 minutes ago. The fund's $750,000 in cash are currently sitting in Fidelity's escrow account. I don't care, Richard shouted. We won't sell to her. If you breach this contract today, Thomas continued, dropping his voice to a chilling register, Oak Street Holdings will immediately file A-list pendants against the property, tying it up in litigation for years. You won't be able to sell it to anyone. Furthermore, we will sue you for specific performance and breach of contract. You will lose the house, and you will pay our legal fees. I looked at David. He was hyperventilating. If the sale didn't close today, he wouldn't get his wire transfer. If he didn't get his wire transfer, his bridge loan sharks were going to destroy him. Dad, David choked out, the panic completely overtaking his rage. Dad, we have to close. I need the money. Today. They'll ruin me. My father looked at his golden boy, then looked at me. For the first time in my 32 years of life, my father looked at me with genuine fear. He finally realized that the quiet daughter he had ignored her entire life had quietly amassed enough power, wealth, and ruthlessness to trap him in a cage of his own making. "Sign the final transfer deeds, Richard," I said softly, delivering the final blow. "Or David goes bankrupt by Monday." With a shaking hand, a defeated posture, and tears streaming quietly down Martha's face, my father picked up the blue ballpoint pen. He didn't say another word. He just signed the house over to me. The ink on the closing documents was barely dry when the final, catastrophic act of my family's self-destruction began. David got his money. The $750,000 wire transfer cleared Fidelity's escrow account at exactly 2:45 p.m. that Friday, hitting David's newly minted corporate bank account. From my vantage point in my newly acquired, blissfully quiet Victorian home, the silence over that weekend was deafening. There were no angry texts from my father, no tearful voicemails from my mother. They were likely celebrating in their cramped Schaumburg apartment, toasting to the genius of their golden child who had narrowly escaped the clutches of his bridge loan lenders. I pictured David, swirling an expensive glass of bourbon he couldn't afford, bragging about how he had outsmarted the corporate suits. But I knew the tech world, and I knew the ruthless landscape of boutique finance. Before the closing, I had quietly run a deep dive background check on the lead developer. David had been boasting about a man parading under the name Garrett Caldwell. Garrett claimed to be a former Silicon Valley prodigy who had pivoted to decentralized finance. He wasn't. Garrett Caldwell was a ghost. The LinkedIn profile was entirely AI-generated, populated with endorsements from bot accounts. His company, Aegis Chain Solutions, had been registered in a notorious tax haven in the Seychelles exactly 3 weeks before David first pitched his startup to our parents over roast beef. Garrett had fed David a cocktail of buzzwords: smart contracts, liquidity pools, blockchain integration, and David, blinded by his own staggering arrogance and desperate need to be recognized as a tech visionary, swallowed it whole. I didn't engineer David's downfall. I didn't have to. I just stepped out of the way of the speeding train and watched it derail. The explosion happened on Tuesday morning. I was sitting in the sunroom of my home drinking a pour-over coffee and reviewing contractor bids for a massive kitchen remodel. The morning sun was streaming through the restored original windows when my phone began to vibrate violently against the glass table. It was my mother. I watched it ring until it went to voicemail. 2 minutes later, my father called. Then David. Then my mother again. The barrage was relentless. Over the course of 45 minutes, my screen lit up 22 times. Finally, I opened my voicemail app. The first message was from Martha. It wasn't the sound of a woman who was merely upset. It was the guttural, hyperventilating sound of a woman whose entire reality had just collapsed into dust. "Clara. Clara, please pick up," she sobbed, her voice cracking so severely I could barely understand her. "Please, God, you have to help us." "David, the money is gone. The developers are gone. The website is just a blank page. He wired Garrett $600,000 yesterday morning to fund the liquidity pool, and the phone numbers are all disconnected. Clara, the bridge loan. He didn't pay off the principal of the loan on Friday, he only paid the interest to extend it. They are going to take everything. Please call me back. Please." A classic crypto rug pull. Garrett Caldwell had taken the money and vanished into the digital ether. The second voicemail was from David. He sounded manic, feral, entirely untethered from reality. "Clara, listen to me, I need a loan. I need $500,000 right now. This is a misunderstanding. Garrett just migrated the servers, that's why the site is down. But Ironclad Capital is threatening to seize my assets. You have to wire me the money, Clara. You have to do it right now, or I'm calling the police and telling them you committed real estate fraud." I actually laughed out loud at that one. The delusion was breathtaking. The final voicemail was from my father, Richard. The booming, confident patriarch who had mocked my career and belittled my financial standing was completely gone. His voice was a hollow, trembling whisper. "Clara." He lost it all. "My God. Clara." He lost everything. Call me. I'm begging you. I didn't call them back. Instead, I dialed Thomas, my corporate attorney. They've realized the money is gone, I told him calmly, watching a pair of blue jays land on the massive oak tree in my front yard. David was scammed. They're going to panic. I need to make absolutely certain they cannot attempt to reverse the sale or claim duress. Let them try, Thomas chuckled, the sound dry and professional. The funds cleared cleanly. The deed is fully recorded with Cook County. You are the sole legal owner of that property. You bought it fair and square through a perfectly legal corporate entity. If they step foot on the lawn, it's trespassing. Your assets are a fortress, Clara. With my own perimeter secured, I sat back and watched the fallout from afar. Through the grapevine of extended family and a few well-placed inquiries, I learned the grim, horrifying details of their financial ruin. It was far worse than I had initially anticipated. The bridge lenders David had used a shadow banking outfit called Ironclad Capital, managed by a ruthless operator named Dominic Russo, didn't play games. David had taken out a $400,000 short-term loan at an astronomical 25% compounding interest rate. When he received the $750,000 from the house sale, a rational person would have paid off Ironclad immediately. But David wasn't rational. Convinced his crypto platform would make him a billionaire by Christmas, he only paid the exorbitant interest fee to keep Ironclad off his back for another month, wiring the bulk of the house money to the scammers. When the scam collapsed, Ironclad acted with terrifying speed. By Thursday, repo men showed up at the trendy downtown commercial space David had leased and towed his leased BMW M5. By Friday, they had legally frozen his remaining domestic bank accounts, draining the paltry $40,000 he had left. David was forced into Chapter 7 bankruptcy before the month was out. Because he had committed to a 5-year commercial lease and defaulted in month 1, the leasing company sued him, easily piercing his flimsy LLC veil and going after him personally for breach of contract. But the absolute hardest, most devastating blow landed squarely on Richard and Martha. In their blind, unquestioning devotion to the golden child, they hadn't just sold the house at a massive loss. I discovered that to help David secure that initial $400,000 bridge loan from Ironclad, my father had secretly co-signed as a guarantor. He had legally pledged his own private retirement portfolio as collateral. When David went under and declared bankruptcy, Dominic Russo and Ironclad Capital didn't hesitate. They executed the guarantee clause. They legally liquidated my father's entire $401k to cover the massive remaining deficit of the loan, plus the astronomical penalty fees. Decades of savings, erased with a single signature. By Christmas, the golden boy was sleeping on a deflated air mattress in the cramped living room of our parents' 2-bedroom Schaumburg rental. My father, once a proud, boasting executive who golfed 3 times a week, had to take a grueling job mixing paint and stocking shelves at a local hardware store at the age of 66 just to keep the lights on. Martha, who hadn't worked since the 80s, was forced to take up a part-time shift as a receptionist at a strip mall dental office, dealing with angry patients for minimum wage. Their wealth, their status, and their cherished legacy were entirely gone. Evaporated into the blockchain, sacrificed on the altar of their favoritism. They had willingly burned their own house down to keep David warm, and now they were all freezing in the ashes. The last time I saw them was in early April, 6 months after the closing. I had spent the winter restoring the Oak Park house to its former glory. I ripped up the old carpets, refinished the original hardwood, completely modernized the kitchen with chef-grade appliances, and planted a massive bed of hydrangeas where my mother's neglected rose bushes used to be. The house finally felt like mine, untainted by the shadow of my brother. It was a rainy Sunday afternoon. I was in the library, reading a book, when the doorbell rang. I walked to the foyer, glancing through the sidelight window. My breath caught for a second. Standing on the wraparound porch, the porch I had paid to fix, were Richard, Martha, and David. They looked 10 years older. My father was hunched against the rain, wearing a cheap windbreaker. David looked hollowed out, the smug arrogance completely wiped from his features. My mother was clutching a Tupperware container. I opened the door, leaving the heavy brass chain engaged. I looked at them through the 4-inch gap. Clara, my mother choked out, her eyes darting past me to look at the gleaming new floors and the expensive art on the walls. Oh, Clara, the house looks. It looks beautiful. What do you want, Martha? I asked. I didn't call her Mom. My father stepped forward, swallowing hard. Clara, we made a mistake. A terrible mistake. David was conned. We were all conned. You weren't conned, Richard, I corrected him, my voice ice cold. You were greedy. You saw dollar signs and you threw your daughter away to get them. The scammers just did to David what you tried to do to me. David looked at the floor, unable to meet my gaze. Clara, please, he muttered, his voice weak. We're drowning. Dad's heart can't take the stress of the hardware store. Our rent is going up. We have nothing left. I brought your favorite, my mother pleaded, holding up the Tupperware of lasagna. We just want to be a family again. We were hoping, maybe, we could move into the guest rooms, just until we get back on our feet. It's our home, Clara. I looked at the three of them standing in the rain. I felt no anger anymore. I felt no sadness. I just felt a profound, absolute emptiness where my familial love used to be. This is not your home, I said quietly. This is Oak Street Holdings, LLC, and we are not accepting tenants. I gently, firmly, closed the door until I heard the latch click. I engaged the deadbolt. I didn't look out the window to watch them walk back to whatever beat-up car they had driven there. I simply took my book, walked back into my beautiful, quiet house, and poured myself a glass of wine. They gambled their entire lives on the golden child. Now, they get to live with the payout. And that is exactly why you never set yourself on fire to keep a toxic golden child warm. Clara played the ultimate game of chess while her family was playing checkers, and karma delivered the absolute knockout punch. If this story made your blood boil and then cheer for Clara's revenge, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this with someone who needs a reminder that the best revenge is massive, quiet success. Have you ever had to cut off toxic family members? Let me know in the comments below.